Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I am your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I am delighted to welcome a very accomplished wellness or a health tech entrepreneur from Seattle, USA, Mr. Abhijay AJ Gandhi. AJ, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Ashutosh. Appreciate it.
Thank you. AJ is the Chief Executive Officer of Glue Incorporated, which is building an AI wellness platform with a mission to deliver wellness and happiness. He has worked with McKinsey, Lehman Brothers, Wells Fargo, and SunTrust banks. Uh, when he has free time, AJ is an avid mountaineer and a technical climber who has scaled over 20,000-foot peaks across North, Central, and South America, Africa, and Himalayas. And I noticed he's not yet added Everest, which I'm sure will be on his list sometime. But AJ, before we start talking about glue, tell me about your own journey in brief.
Thanks, Ashutosh. I feel like when I did not know the word pivot right from the start, that's kind of the life that I've had a chance and the privilege to be leading.
Hmm.
So most people think of life as some combination of personal and professional. When I was born, my parents were still in medical school, and so I spent the first few years of my life with my grandparents.
Mhm.
Along the way, my parents went to the UK to complete their education, so I spent a few years of my growing my childhood in the UK. So personally, I've had a chance. I've changed literally a dozen schools. I spent the last few years of my schooling in St. Paul's School, Darjeeling, up in the
Mhm.
Himalayas, in
Yeah.
a boarding school.
Mhm.
So personally, I've had a lot of opportunities to look at life through different vantage points, and that I think at some point translated into my professional life. I started up in marketing and brand management. I
Mhm.
worked way back in time at the Procter& and Gamble company. And then after earning an MBA from the Wharton School, I did consulting. I worked with McKinsey, as you mentioned, and that led me to Wall Street, where I spent about a decade, ultimately stitching firms together, which gave me a deep insight into technology.
Yeah.
And then more recently, over the last decade, I've been building tech companies. So it's been
Amazing.
a journey of pivots. It's been a tremendously exciting and enjoyable
Absolutely.
journey,
And I
and I
can
consider it a real
I can,
privilege.
before we started recording, I could see your passion for wellness. But, AJ, you also describe yourself as wellness obsessed. Tell me, what
Right.
does this mean? And when did this passion develop?
So I'm from a family of doctors.
Yeah.
I think I mentioned that a moment ago. And all dinner table conversations have always been about the future of humanity, what we're doing for them. The big seminal point for me was COVID. My
Mhm.
brother is an infectious disease doctor here in the US, and I had a front row seat
Mhm.
to the pandemic and how it played out. And while there are many different takeaways for different constituencies, the piece that stood out for me was that while COVID was dire and literally shut the whole world down, the folks who were most impacted were those who already had underlying conditions. And that, while it has been spoken about, was what caught my attention. And so I started to geek out on that. I started to research that, and I realized that ultimately everything starts from a baseline of wellness. And while human progress has been fantastic over the last 50 years, as we all know,
Mhm.
there have been some compromises along the way. And the human body, which is kind of the vessel upon which we all express ourselves through this journey called life, has had a bit of a pivot or a bit of a tweaking, which has not been optimal. And so, as I started to go back and I started to reinvestigate the healthcare system here in the US, I realized that there was a real opportunity to go back to basics, to go back to the roots, and to reestablish what we were 50 years ago, which today is called preventative and which does not have nearly as much importance as it should. So I figured that I had about a good 20 years left of my career, and that's what I would focus the rest of my working years towards, and
Amazing.
hence Wellness Obsessed, because I think that's
Amazing.
the
Yeah.
platform upon which we'll take the next leap.
Amazing. And good luck with this mission. So let's now, AJ, move to talking about Glue, which is
Right.
an AI wellness platform. What is your core mission and how are you going about achieving it?
So, at a fundamental level, we think that we can reboot human health.
Yeah.
And that, as I just mentioned, is important for us to get to the next level of human evolution. A lot of wellness entrepreneurs that I interact with have the passion, have had that for years, but they're all in the B2C world. So they find a group of individuals, whether they build apps or they offer services. Scaling has been a challenge forever. And there's this term called CAC,
Mhm.
cost of acquisition, which has been customer acquisition, which has been very high for them. We're thinking that there is a real opportunity, given a lot of tailwinds, which we'll talk through during this conversation, to be able to drive wellness within corporate America and at scale through a B2B platform.
Mhm.
This is a maverick approach, at least as it is today. And we think that of the 165 million corporate Americans who work in structured environments, we have the opportunity to reach a majority of them through our platform and through Glutron, which is our AI wellness coach,
Mhm.
be able to customize what wellness means to each of them. Obviously, wellness is a different experience for each individual based on where they are and where they're headed.
Mhm. Wow. In everything that you sent me, you didn't talk about Glutron. So that's something which I've got to. And obviously, you brought in some kind of technology into building Glutron as well. But
Right,
you just spoke about AJ, the need to take wellness to corporate America.
right.
What are some of the biggest challenges corporations face in being able to bring in employee wellness into their own organizations?
So there are three that we've been wrestling with. The first is that there is a wide swath of
Mm.
wellness needs.
Right.
The top 5% of corporate America workers are pretty unwell. We call that the trifecta. So they have underlying conditions, some combination of diabetes, heart disease, blood pressure, and obviously bad LDL. And they are very, very sick. And for fully funded programs, up to 60% of the cost of healthcare goes towards this 5%. So that's pretty extreme. At the bottom end of what we call the barbell
Hmm.
are folks who are completely well. So 50% of corporate America is completely well and they have no needs, and therefore employers assume that they'll be well forever, which has not been the case if you take a 20-year view. So that's one big challenge. How does one meet the wellness needs of such a diverse audience? The second big one is that for corporate America, especially fully funded programs, which is most of the large organizations, the belief is that as long as we provide healthcare, we've solved the wellness needs. Now, based on data alone, there is no proof that that is true. Corporate America partners with the healthcare industry, but the healthcare industry has specialized in higher end interventions.
Hmm.
Baseline, what we largely call population health, has not been the needs have not been met, and there is no efficacy data that can corroborate that the healthcare industry is actually working for baseline health.
Hmm.
So that's the second big one
Yeah.
where a CEO thinks we're providing healthcare, so we've solved for the wellness needs.
Hmm.
And then there is a third challenge, which is the friction in consuming wellness, which is obviously an individual or an employee challenge. Most employees who are very serious about their career and who are successful are stretched for time. And so they have to solve for wellness outside of their day job, which for most Americans is 40, 50 hours.
Hmm.
And then there's families to take care of. So while wellness is important, it never gets prioritized. And so it has to be solved for outside of the life of a typical employee. And so that becomes a big challenge because in that situation, when the child is unwell or a major presentation is coming up, wellness falls through the wayside.
Hmm.
And so that becomes something we feel we can solve and we are solving for by removing the friction out of the consumption of wellness point
Great
solutions.
response. Great response. Thank you. And how do you, through Glue, address issues like burnout, stress, mental health, which are what I call 21st century challenges of wellness?
Very well said. While you will recognize most of those are outcomes, so the
Absolutely.
source of those outcomes was seeded someplace in the past.
Absolutely.
So while the healthcare system is here to intervene, to parachute for crisis situations or things like burnout, our intention is to be able to create a source code upon which employees
Hmm.
and employers can transact. And at a future date, so 3 months, 6 months, 9 months down the line, there is a change in trajectory, and that becomes the new normal.
Hmm.
So while we will leave it to the healthcare industry to intervene on crisis situations, we're much focused on integrating wellness as a lifestyle
Mm.
through the corporate terminal so that it is seamless and we take the friction out of the consumption.
Mm. Fascinating. I was going to ask you a question on using AI for creating personalized wellness solutions, but you beat me to it by talking about Glutron. So tell me about Glutron and how do you create personalized wellness solutions?
Sure. To be able to do that, we just need to construct what the platform is.
Please, yes.
So there are three what we call key pillars.
Mm.
Wellness means different things to different people and at different stages in their lives.
Mm.
So, a curated knowledge base upon which, for instance, a young 25-year-old can start to talk about now that they are more sedentary in their lifestyle,
Mm.
what are the changes their body is going to experience, and therefore, what must they do?
Right.
Or a premenopausal lady who is 45 years old can start to think about how she should start to adapt her diet or her workout regimen to be able to see what's going to happen in the 50s. So there's a lot of need to curate what wellness means at an individualized level. So that's the
Mm.
first pillar. The second pillar, and this, I guess, all corporate America and all corporate workers know, is what gets measured gets done. So there's what we call the tools pillar, right? So whether it's the Apple Watch or whether it's a blood report at the equivalent of LabCorp,
Mm.
uh, all of that needs to be brought together. It needs to be baseline, and then individuals need to say or,
Yep.
or set goals for them on how to do better or how to change the trajectory of whatever's going on. So that's the tools pillar. And then finally, there's the marketplace, which is really where we add value by bringing all the point solutions onto the corporate desktop.
Mm.
The combination of these three create what at a future date we will talk about as the wellverse.
Mm.
Within that, the ability to have every individual have customized solutions and customized inputs
Mm.
that they can then control and drive to create whatever is their optimal wellness
Mhm.
is what technology does. It gives them the opportunity through. So as we bring these three pillars together, we create an LLM, a large language model of a
Yep.
lot of data that
Mm.
is uniquely personal to each individual.
Mm.
When we deploy AI onto that LLM, every morning there could be a set of solutions that are purely customized, in my case to AJ, so that when Glutron talks to me, I know that it is not a generic set of inputs, but they are uniquely customized to my life journey thus far and to
Wow.
my objectives into the near future.
Wow. And this is something, AJ, I've never heard of, despite so many years being in the same field. But customization of wellness plans through technology is something unique, and I'm looking forward to understanding much more and hopefully signing up for your app very quickly. But tell me, given the amount of data that you are collecting,
Right.
there are two questions I want to ask you relating to data. What role does data play in understanding and improving employee wellness? And on the other side, how do you handle data privacy?
So let's start with with
Okay.
the second,
Yeah,
because that becomes the predominant preoccupation of both employers and employees.
correct.
So we're obviously SOC 2 Type 2 compliant,
Mm.
which is a higher level of compliance for data versus HIPAA, which is what employee data is regulated by in the US. And all data is anonymized. So while we are custodians of data, the employer never gets to see the data of person A or person B.
Mm.
So between regulation, which is HIPAA, and SOC 2 Type 2,
Mm.
we're compliant to the data standards. And as far as the employer is concerned, all data is anonymized. So they will have no opportunity to be able to stripe out specifics with respect to an employee. So that is something we've solved for right up front and that we care about more than probably most other things. How data actually helps an employee
Mhm.
um, change their trajectory in our situation is really compelling. So the best case in point is that the US, unlike, I don't know as much about other markets, but there is a perfect correlation between illness and age. And
Mm.
while this seems intuitive, that's not really quite true about India. There are 70-year-old yogis in India who've never, been in a hospital a
Yeah.
day, but that is not really the case in the US for a majority of the population. And so what tends to happen is that a 25-year-old graduating from college is perfectly healthy. At 30, they're still at the pink of their health. By the time they're 35, a little bit of here and there starts to creep. And by the time they're 40, they're onto a couple of prescription medication. And by the time they're 50, they're taking between 5 and 7 prescription
Yeah.
medications. So there's a perfect correlation. If you do a scatter plot, you find that age and wellness are perfectly correlated. And I think that that is a challenge of the modern life that is not inherent in human history.
Absolutely.
And so when we collect this data, we know exactly what points in time,
Mm,
based on what behaviors, whether it is food, whether it's exercise, whether it's mental wellness, individuals are going to start to suffer. And so for that 50% of the population that we spoke about earlier with respect to the barbell, we think that this data is going to help them change their trajectory.
mm,
And that's going to make them much more productive, live much more fulfilling lives, have employers love us for the productivity that we create within the ecosystem,
mm,
and ultimately have the healthcare system also partner with us because now we're changing the trajectory and setting them free to go and solve for higher end interventions like the end of cancer, the
mm.
end of heart disease, etc.
Fascinating. When I was preparing and reading about you to prepare for this conversation, I was also fascinated by another word, which is well-verse.
Right.
What does building well-verse entail, and how can this transform the workplace?
Beautiful. This is what we obsess on, but we think we need to earn our right to ultimately declare the well-wish.
Mhm.
So earlier in the conversation, we talked about the three pillars
Yeah.
that comprise glue on the corporate desktop. What comprises wellness, the knowledge piece, how to measure wellness, the tools piece, and the marketplace, which is a compendium of all wellness point solutions. So that resides within the corporate desktop and it removes friction away from the employee to pursue wellness while they're working. So that's kind of within the corporate desktop. Partnering with that is the ecosystem. So there's the CEO. They have never really bought into the concept that wellness actually has a strong ROI. And now we have enough data through 20 years of collecting this to prove that for every dollar spent on wellness, the return is somewhere between 3 and 5x. So
Yeah.
3 to 5 times ROI.
Mm,
So the CEO then becomes a partner because at the higher end, the 5% most unwell folks, we can see that the healthcare costs can actually flatten. The rallying cry is flatten the curve. We can actually have it decline,
mm,
which is unheard of within the industry. For the 50%, they continue to basically be well for much longer than their peer sets or previous generations. Then there is the vendor, or what we call the wellness champion who offers wellness solutions.
mm,
We talked about how they're mostly B2C, you know, reaching out to individual customers and they never have scale. So a typical chiropractor will have 2 or 3 sittings with a new customer and then they'll walk out the door and then they have to go and find another customer. So it's a very leaky bucket.
mm,
But when you bring 165 million employees onto a platform and then you offer the services to the vendor of or access to the platform,
mm,
suddenly they can focus on innovation, they can focus on customer delight, and they no longer have to do the hunting game, which takes up a lot of their energy and
mm,
therefore, the ability to keep increasing their offerings, their wellness offerings.
mm,
So when they come onto the platform, and a lot of them come onto the platform, then the customer also has limitless choice. So they can talk about, all of the other dimensions of wellness, which you've not talked about: mental, physical, occupational, spiritual, environmental.
mm,
So the vendors then starts to win because now they can focus on innovation and improving their product and solutioning.
mm,
And then there is the ecosystem, right? So the US has a country level problem with healthcare, right? We spend $4 trillion on healthcare, 20% of GDP, 2x what any other OECD company spends, basically any other developed nation, and our efficacy is about a half. So we're
mm,
we're we're underperforming by somewhere between 1:4 to 1:8. And
mm,
so policy needs to be able to figure out how to take care of at least these 165 million corporate employees and mostly the 330 million people that reside within the US. So
mm,
they become a partner. And then finally, as a combination of all of these, we have the healthcare system, which is totally overburdened by
mm,
population illness.
mm,
As we start to drive wellness within corporate America, their illness weight, that their population of unwell people reduces, and then they can start to focus on what they've been trained for, which is
Mm,
higher end interventions. So
mm,
the virtuous cycle established by each of these constituencies, when it is at full play, which we
mm.
think is by about 2029, our equivalent of the singularity, is when we will declare the wellverse as having been established.
Amazing, amazing. You also talk about a wellness spending account,
Yes.
WSA. Tell me a little bit about this and what do do you anticipate its potential impact to be?
That is going to be the game changer at a policy level.
Mm,
So the big microeconomic challenge of our times is that there is no indifference curve between preventative and curative.
mm,
It seems like a lot of jargon, but let me try and demystify.
mm,
If a lady who is overworked and has young children
mm,
gets to a state of lack of sleep for a week or two, she is inevitably at some point going to end up with a migraine.
mm,
So Excedrin exists as a pill she can pop. Now it's a strong pill and it destroys a lot of gray cell, but it also gets rid of the migraine. So we call that curative.
mm,
But if she instead knows that she has to take care of herself and does 3 days of yoga a week
mm,
to be able to maintain her wellness, she's got to drop $20 a class or
mm.
$250 a week. And that is a big ask for a young family which
Yeah.
has all of these needs. And so there's an indifference curve established. She has the ability to cure herself once she's unwell, but she does not have the same equivalent ability to keep herself well.
Mm,
And the wellness spending account is designed to get rid of that inequity. What we're championing with Washington, D.C., and with ERISA especially is look, guys, healthcare has the FSA, the flexible spending account, which is a pre-tax account
mm,
where employers can fund and employees can avail to cure themselves. Why should we not have the equivalent curated spending account, which is also pre-tax, where employees drive their preventative wellness so that they never get ill? And
mm.
that concept is the WSA. And that's the lobbying effort that we're doing with DC to be able to change the trajectory of wellness in this country.
Amazing. So, I have time for one more question.
Sure.
And this one is for a lot of people who will be listening to our conversation. AG has a thought leader in the health tech AI space and someone who has been a senior corporate leader himself. What is the message you would like to share with CEOs who are hesitant to invest in employee wellness?
So the big challenge of our times is to be able to create a differentiator. DEI used to be one such differentiator in the US, and with the Supreme Court ruling from last September, or September before last at this point, some of that has diluted.
Mm,
There is a lot of dominance of AI, but ultimately the differentiator is going to be people, and there does not seem to be a defensible moat.
mm,
We believe that in the near future, the partnership between the employer and the employee is going to be that differentiator and is going to be that moat. We're
mm.
starting to see that with large organizations such as NVIDIA, which has some of the highest tenures ever.
Yeah.
Wellness is always going to be central to an employee's ability to manage their lives in their most optimal way and thereby contribute to their employers. In all of the investments that we've seen, which are people centric, we do not believe that there is any investment a CEO can make more than in the overall wellness of their people.
Mm,
Now, as things stand, CEOs think that by providing healthcare, they're investing in wellness, which
mm.
on the fringe may potentially be true, but it is much more about curative, which we have not seen any evidence of within this country. And
Absolutely.
so we feel that that 3 to 5 X ROI that is a definitive return on wellness is probably going to be the game changer. And from a CEO's perspective, we don't think that they can make any better investment than in the wellness of their people for the future of their company. So it is not just an altruistic endeavor. It is actually at the heart of competitive business advantage at this point.
What a great response. And on that note, AJ, I just want to say thank you so much for speaking to me about your own incredible journey. You know, I've seen most organizations have a medical plan. I've not seen any company anywhere in the world which has a wellness plan. And I think you're probably going to pioneer wellness across many, many large corporations in the world. Thank you for speaking to me about the mission of Glue. Thank you for talking to me about the challenges young people are facing with regard to burnout, stress, and mental health. I also learned new things about you from you about Glutron. And what was very interesting was how you have really focused on something that is specific and measurable. That really is like a mantra for me for all my life as an employee. That unless something is specific and measurable, it doesn't result in anything substantive happening. Thank you also for talking to me about Wellverse and the wellness spending account. Thank you for speaking to me, and good luck to you.
Thank you, Ashutosh.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.